Governor Cooper, thank you so much for your time again. I do want to begin with a question that we asked Republican Senator Vicky Sawyer today about what she wanted people to know about the abortion restrictions bill. And she said, we're not Texas. Do you think Senate Bill 20 is middle of the road in any sense?
Absolutely not. Republicans rammed this bill through with no public input, with no amendments, and it drastically reduces women's access to health care. They've dressed it up to appear like a 12-week ban and a compromise, but it's really not. It creates obstacles for women to get through that doctors say is totally unnecessary. They've tried to disguise the disastrous impacts of this bill, but we're going to expose it. We know it's going to be hard for clinics to stay open with all of the requirements that they have put on this. This has nothing to do with making women safer and has everything to do with banning abortions.
You know, Republicans say that there are some in their caucus that wanted a 6-week ban. This is a 12-week ban. This was a compromise. Do you see that, at least in their caucus, they compromised?
So it's not really a 12-week ban. For example, most women use medication for their healthcare procedures, the medication abortion. There's actually a 10-week ban because of the way this legislation is written. And with all of the obstacles that are in this bill, requiring 3 in-person visits by a woman to a clinic, many women can't afford the travel costs, the time off from work to do all of that with the backlog that they have at the clinics now. This is really a ban that is throughout the first trimester for a woman. And that's what's so deeply concerning about this, that they dressed this thing up as a 12-week ban when it's really not.
You have spoken about this bill being particularly impactful for poor women and rural women. Which specific restrictions are you most concerned about? You mentioned a couple, but elaborate.
Well, I think the requirements on clinics now are medically unnecessary that they are putting on them. It's very difficult for them to stay open now, and this will make it so much harder. The requirement for 3 in-person appearances by the woman in a clinic that doctors have said medically unnecessary. All of the invasive questions that they've asked requiring women to send the ultrasound to the state. This is what happens when you let right-wing politicians into the exam room with women and their doctors. That exam room should be for doctors and women and not for politicians. All we need is one Republican in either the House or the Senate to support the situation on the veto. I'm going to veto this legislation. The numbers are very close in both the House and the Senate. So there are a number of Republicans who have promised their constituents that they're going to protect women's reproductive freedom. We want to work to hold them to that promise and try to prevent this bill from becoming law, because it will be disastrous for North Carolina.
Let's talk about what's next, Governor. You have called on 4 Republicans in particular. You named names to vote against a veto override. Do you have any real hope that they will? And have you heard anything from them?
So we know what they promised their constituents. And the problem with this legislation is that it was pushed through so fast that the public really doesn't know very much about it. Over the next few days, we're going to be talking about all of the problems with this legislation and how it is going to work as an effective ban for women and their reproductive freedom. And what we want is for the constituents to these legislators to say to the legislators, hey, this is what you told us during the campaign. Keep your promise, because this legislation does not square with what you told us during the campaign. That's what we want. And, you know, I've got faith in people that they could stand up to their party to say, this is not right.
Back to the question, though, Governor, have you been able to talk directly to any of those legislators?
So they don't have to answer to me. They have to answer to their constituents. And their constituents are going to be much more effective in letting them know how this legislation works and that they need to stand up for them and to keep their promises. One of the things, my job here is to let people know, let these constituents know across North Carolina. I want these legislators to hear from the doctors. I want them to hear from the nurses. I want them to hear from the women who are going to be affected by this legislation and let them know straight from them that this is wrong for North Carolina. So hopefully they will do the right thing and keep their promises.
What other plans do you have for the 10 days you have to veto or sign the bill to try and change at least one lawmaker's vote? Again, you're saying that it's not going to be up to you, but what are your plans in that time?
So we will be talking to people all over the state. We will be educating North Carolinians about what this bill does, that it's not a compromise, that there's a reason that it was rammed through in a very short period of time. There was a reason why they kept it under lock and key until they revealed it and only let the public see it in less than 48 hours. There's a reason why that they didn't allow any amendments by anybody. There's a reason why no Democrats were involved in putting this legislation together. It is not a compromise. It is not a 12-week ban. This effectively bans abortion. It's wrong for North Carolina. And we're going to let the public know that so that when the time comes for a veto override vote, these legislators can tell the Republican leadership, we need to go back to the drawing board. This is not a good bill for North Carolina.
I want to have you elaborate on that point as well. What does how the bill and how it was created and released say to you?
It says to me that it's bad legislation. They knew it was bad. They wanted to get it passed before the public knew anything about it. And they succeeded in that. Fortunately, our Constitution allows for a gubernatorial veto. It allows the governor 10 days before that veto is issued. And during this period of time, we're going to let the public know what's exactly in this legislation and why it's wrong for our state.
Quick question for you, Governor. Final question for you. Why didn't Democrats make a bigger case? If you knew that Republicans were going to push forward some legislation, why not reach out to voters before anything was released and have an intense campaign before it was released, as opposed to having to do it afterward?
We did. Every single Democrat signed on to legislation that adopts the standard in Roe versus Wade. That was filed in the legislature. They held a big press conference about it. Of course, the legislation never went anywhere because Republicans were in the back room cooking up this bad bill. And that's what they have unleashed on the public. I think North Carolinians, by a large margin, support the standards in Roe v. Wade. And that's what Democrats have been saying, and all of the Democrats are together on that.
Governor Cooper, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks a lot.